All right, what are you doing here today?
So we're at our client's property today, mostly taking care of the invasive plants that are present in our landscape, and we're really at this time of the year focusing on the mature woody species that are here. So that's buckthorn, that's bittersweet, that's burning bush, and Norway maples.
Okay, how are you dealing with them?
So in this case, at this time of the year, we're strictly doing cut and paint treatments. So we cut the plant down to the base of the plant, and then we're painting, daubing, dabbing, herbicide on that stem.
Okay, and how late into the season can you do that?
So our window of treatment for cut and paints for most woody invasive species is essentially from June until February, and that tail end can be variable just based upon when the temperatures start coming up. So we want to avoid the spring sap flows. So if we have a slightly earlier spring because of mild winter, that's where that time frame might be compressed.
Okay, so any time until February, basically, June to February.
Until spring sap flows.
Sap, okay.
So we use February as kind of that marker.
How do people know when that is?
Essentially, if you see any sort of buds on your forsythia, that's too late. Okay. So again, we look at it as a rough guideline, but if we understand that if we're having consistently high temperatures and 60-degree temperatures in January, that's where our time frame might be compressed.
Okay. What about what about snow on the ground? Can you move the snow aside and do that?
Yeah. So as long as the snow's not too deep, we don't really work when we're having to traverse foot-deep snow. But if you just have a dusting on the ground, it doesn't impede any of the treatments.
Okay. So that's the treatment. Obviously, you can do mechanical anytime.
Mechanical might be trickier if the ground's frozen because the roots will stay in the ground. So mostly mechanical happens while the ground is still workable, which could be as late as December, depending upon the season.
Okay. And then as far as seeds and berries that may have already dropped to the ground, how do you handle those in the spring?
So, well, when we're actually doing the work for invasives, if there's still an abundance of seeds, we usually leave that material somewhere on a client's site so that the following year we can treat that area specifically where we left the seed. The benefits of kind of doing it in the off season, if you will, in the late fall, winter time frame is that for some plants, a lot of those seeds have already dropped. So you're not having to worry about managing that. They're already in the landscape. So when it comes time for any follow-up work the next season, that's where we look at doing either foliar treatments or follow-up mechanical pulling if it's spot. Okay. If it's fairly insignificant.
All right. And then exceptions to this in terms of things that that are not woody, but that you have to be careful of timing-wise?
Sure. The only exceptions I would say to our woody plant treatments typically fall within stuff like tree of heaven, where you're worrying about suckering, and evidence doesn't suggest that winter treatments are necessarily effective. So that's where we really look at the calendar that's outlined at, I believe it's Penn State's guidelines of July through first week in October, typically. And then outside of that, anything that needs to be foliar treated, so that's knotweed, that's garlic mustard, that's in some cases black swallowwort, all those are really going to benefit from focusing in on when the plant material is actively growing, past its spring sap flow, and its leaves are treatable.
And remind me again the timing for knotweed, because this is very popular as a conversation and people are very worried about it. So let's go through the timing of each of the stages. Okay.
So at this point in the year, knotweed is dead. It can be cut back without worrying about spreading it. So if you have it on your property and you hate looking at it, now is a fine time to cut it down. It can be composted or put in the trash. But knotweed, what you're typically looking at is you're cutting it back in June, right? You're letting it regrow for 8 weeks after that cutting, and then you're treating it with an herbicide in August, September. And that start time depends on when you cut it back, because you really want 8 weeks, 2 months of growth before treatment, so it has enough growth in it that it has an effective surface area for treatment. And we typically use glyphosate only on those foliar applications, just because the other herbicides available to us are either ineffective or they cause much bigger problems in the environment and the soil than what glyphosate does.
Like triclopyr,
right? Triclopyr is ineffective on it, but like imazapyr is a much more, it basically prevents anything from growing in the soil, so it has this persistence effect in the soil, like really affecting any possible growth, and that's a product that we don't use at all, and we tend to avoid, especially with considerations of groundwater and other things.
So what are the chemicals you're using for the cut and paints today?
So
what's in there?
The cut and paint we're using today is glyphosate.
Yeah.
That we like just because it readily binds to the soil, so we're not worried about it going into the water table. In terms of the actual labeled herbicide safety warning, it's on the lowest end of that in terms of considerations for our applicators. And it also allows us to very easily have an aquatic herbicide which removes the surfactant. So we're removing any excess unnecessary chemicals being put into the environment.
Great. What else should I know?
Basically, you just want to make sure that you're avoiding any spring sap flows for when you're doing your cut and paint treatments for woody plants. There's a narrow window of certain plants like garlic mustard where treating during the spring is more appropriate, but typically as a hard and fast rule, we look at June through the leaves to change color for foliar applications, and then till February for cut and paint applications.
What do you think are the most threatening invasive plants in this region?
Yeah, so it's kind of a two-stage question or answer. The plants that are threatening and also a pain in the butt to manage, I would put those as Japanese knotweed, tree of heaven, and black swallowwort. Those are highly dispersive, highly problematic in terms of disrupting the environment, and also very nuanced in how they need to be treated, or they require multiple applications to really get a handle on it. The other plants that are very problematic for the environment but are much more simple to manage and control and are very easy to control when using herbicides are things like Asiatic bittersweet and glossy buckthorn and burning bush. Those are all very simple to control plants. They just need to be done.
Yep, and you have all three of them here.
All three of those, yep.
Great.
So that's what we love to see in our winter work, is plants that are going to really benefit from this control timing and really set us up for the next season to not have as much material to be managing, and we're just looking at mostly the seed bank that's present.
Yeah, I mean, and this is something that the average homeowner can take on.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's depending upon, like, everything we're doing here only really requires an understanding of the plants that we're treating, the nuance of that, and really the muscle to actually do it. But in terms of a homeowner, it's certainly possible to educate themselves on things like bittersweet and buckthorn, and especially when you're treating it with a cut stump treatment, those are all application techniques that are very, very safe for an individual to be able to apply themselves.
That's great. What about disposal, finally?
Yeah, so in terms of the material that's being cut out of the landscape, any berries that we have present, which at this point in the season we're just managing burning bush. We're cutting those auxiliary stems out and bagging those and putting them in the trash, and then the main part of that brush is being sent to the landscape waste stream.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.